Hello everyone. Hello. Today I'm going to continue to build off some of the concepts I was trying to process to figure out if this scar could have been created by, well, I just wanted to know what could have possibly been a likely cause of something of this scale. And some of the concepts I had already been aware of, the polar configuration, symbols of an alien sky. The works of the Thunderbolts project I was just becoming aware of in 2016 at the end, beginning of 2017. I started the concepts about Saturn being our original sun was really familiar to me. Well, not familiar, it just resonated profoundly with me, some of this stuff, it seemed. One of those things where you're starting to explain more than just one or two things. This stuff really made sense. I know they were able to recreate some of these in a plasma lab. And again, some of these formations are like natural formations, but then they're found in the symbols all over the world. So their work I was familiar with, but I didn't understand how I could apply that at any rate to observe scales of this nature. Because in the polar configuration, all their stuff is happening. This is to the north, if I'm to understand it correctly, where you have Saturn up here, and then Mars, I guess, was supposed to be somewhere around here in between Earth. And that's where you get this. This is Mars, this is supposedly Venus. But there was a lot that they didn't really cover, like, because if we start off orbiting Saturn, there's like, we have a long ways to go before we get to the sun. So somewhere there was still a disconnect for what they were saying to what there's like pieces missing is the point. I don't think that they're wrong here. I think they are just still figuring a lot of this stuff out too. Like we're all kind of processing that, and that was something that was hard for me to admit, is that we do not know all these. We don't have all the answers. So while I was trying to process this, if you have Saturn in the north, maybe that causes some of this, but that really doesn't explain this. Like maybe there was a secondary reaction that came back and went out towards the moon. Like maybe the moon was on this side when there was something intense going on to the north that caused this to shoot over. And that was when I first started like applying the thought that maybe this was something possibly caused. This might indicate something towards the moon, because polar configuration, everything's happening north to south, so that doesn't really explain anything that's over here and here. And then on top of that, we still have a redistribution of landmass. I don't know if you just apply a really large current up here, if that would help exchange the rate of spread, but then that doesn't explain these features as much. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I was trying to figure out the likely cause of what may have been this. Looking at these theories, I was familiar with them, but I did not understand everything they were saying. I wasn't aware of everybody who's done work with them. And while I didn't have answers, I made it a point to go out and look beyond just these things. This was primarily the symbols and mythology and stuff like that. But when I'm looking at the world, I'm reading more than mythology here. I'm seeing visible scars. So I needed to explain that, not just, hey, tell me why we have Santa Claus fixated at the North Pole and everybody celebrates once a year. So I was starting to look at some of the other stuff by the Thunderbolts Project, and inevitably I came across the work of Michael Steinbacher. But before then, it was pretty scary because none of this made sense. And when I thought this possibly to think to the moon, I had no idea. I really never thought of the Earth without the moon, you know, because when you look at the science and what they say, there's really no, they don't have clear answers. They say the moon has been here for roughly 4.5 billion years. But now this again goes to the uniformitarian mentality. They don't really know where our moon even came from. And when I started asking this, I had no idea that there was even a time before the moon. When I was revisiting Thunderbolts Project, I also thought to go to Velikovsky and size this up to Venus, and even that really didn't make sense to me personally. So I was having trouble fitting one concept to the other, but being aware of some of the concepts of the Thunderbolts Project, thinking of Pangea Earth, applying that solar flare concept, and then considering it based off the possibility of a red dwarf star, if we were to consider Earth as a satellite of Saturn at one point in time, if Saturn used to be a red dwarf, blah, blah, blah. But then when you take and apply that concept to now Saturn, the red dwarf star, is directly below the inhabitants of land at all time. And that really kind of, there's something more to that, it appears, than just a simple coincidence. It seems to, that kind of resonated deeply with me in terms of like why we have certain things, why we were taught certain things, how origins of mythology came to be. Um, um, but yeah, when you look at what the Thunderbolts Project are saying, you know, you have Saturn, Earth, and Mars, and all three of these, their axial tilts are very similar. And you look at the topography of Mars, and you look at what they were saying, like you have this excavation at the top and this accumulation down below. And if you were to apply that to the polar configuration, that might actually make sense to explain this. But to me, I'm struggling to explain this, because I can look at another planet. I don't see this on other planets. I see this exclusively on our home planet Earth. So I had to size up potentials, and around this time I had considered something like, if we have Pangea Earth, and how much force could we actually get if we were to take our moon and hurl it at the Earth? If we were to hurl it at the Earth, Pangea Earth, could we actually take this and somehow get this from it? And the Thunderbolts Project didn't really tell me about the origins of the moon or anything like that. I was not aware of anything that they really did to indicate any time of the moon. They had no, like, I'm still searching for answers, basically, is what I'm trying to say. And I wasn't finding them, which was kind of disturbing, but you can't blame somebody if we're all trying to figure this out. You know, that was a process for me to understand, was that certain things we didn't have answers for at that time. And that was where I went to look through anything I could find of their work for any indications of scars on Earth. Like they had, I think at that time they were talking about the Grand Canyon possibly being electrically excavated away. And inevitably I had stumbled upon the works of Michael Steinbacher and his 2014 presentation. And this is where I'm going to talk a lot about him here, because I feel like he was incredibly underrated in what he did. And it was just making these observations to try and explain, but it wasn't just that, because he was challenging the geology, the standard theory of geology. Um, and I had no idea about this man when I initially saw the scars, but the fact that he saw them too made me, it was very calming, I guess, because up until this point, I had been under the assumption that this might have been caused by a solar flare and something that could possibly happen again. And I didn't want to look at the Earth because every time I saw these scars, it terrified me. But then I reached Michael Steinbacher's work, and when I saw this video, he seemed aware about it. He seemed very aware about the scar, but he wasn't scared. He was actually quite delightful. So it was nice to listen to him, hear his side of the perspective. I at the time when I saw his video, I didn't know he passed away, and that kind of broke my heart later when I found that out. But in the meantime, it was like I finally had somebody to see things on this scale, and that was very, very comforting. All right. Thank you, everyone. I will talk more later, and we'll get into North America in a moment.